Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We are your hosts, Adriana and May, and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing forth the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
We talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday.
So on today's episode, we're really excited to have a fellow art space artist. Welcome to the podcast, Jean Gray Mohs. Hi.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, we are so excited to speak with you today, learn more about your creative process, how you use your art to share your story, how you build a community through your work, and seek out opportunities as a professional artist, as well as record a bonus segment on scale and pricing tiers for our podcast supporters at levelupartist.com.
But before we dive in, as always, we like to share a little bit more about our guest's background for our listeners, especially for those who may not be familiar with your work. So Jean Gray is a Raleigh-based artist who creates abstract objects that honor and bring attention to the processes and mechanisms of our inner landscape through the use of contrasting study in fragile materials. Through various media with a current focus on painting and sculpture, Jean Gray's work merges the lived experience as a person with chronic illness and past disability into art. Her work has been featured in several exhibitions, including the Contemporary Art Museum in Raleigh, the North Carolina Museum of Art, Duke University Hospital, and there's also an upcoming show at the Greensboro Project Space in the fall of 2023 that we're really looking forward to.
And of course, it's a very formal introduction for our listeners, but Jean Gray, how would you describe your artwork to someone who's never seen it before?
Well, let's see. I think I would say you took some of my words out of my mouth, but definitely, I like to call them objects. I don't know. I have always been a painter, but they're not on canvas anymore. Now they're on a lightweight maple plywood. And often you'll see 2 or 3 pieces that are sort of organic shapes that mimic organs, sometimes structures, sometimes foundations, sometimes positive and negative spaces you might see in trees or if you're out in nature. And they're bound together with a bookbinding waxed thread. So I've been referring to them as objects because I feel like once I finish with them, they almost feel like totems to me. It's like, I don't know, these powerful objects to me. There's a lot of play and movement. If you weren't to see it, you wouldn't know that there's a lot of movement within the piece that's allowed. I always love the toy called a Jacob's Ladder. I don't know if you guys remember that toy of our youth, which is like the wooden blocks that are bound with ribbon, and they make this kind of like clacking sound. Yes. I love that sound, and I love that idea of like movement and play. And so a lot of them have that, even though they are stagnant on a wall. So each piece you'll find has been hung from a nail, if it's just on the wall, my larger pieces, or if it's in a smaller sort of shadow box, it's bound by one point on the back. So even some of those pieces still have play, and that is at their perfect fulcrum. Now I do that because Adriana said a little bit of my work is about chronic illness and disability. So it's commentary on how things can easily just sort of fall out of balance. So those pieces are perfectly balanced. So if you were to try to hang it at any other part, they are designed to collapse on themselves, and that's part of the work, right? So I don't know. It's a meaningful journey for me. And I find, and we'll maybe talk a little bit later, that my work kind of always follows this sort of object as vessel, artist therapy kind of vibe. And I'm trying to think of what else I could describe. As far as colors go, these pieces are made from, the whole collection is called Woven Strangers. And so I like to think of it as I often make 2 pieces of wood at a time and then cut shapes from both. And then kind of, it's like a puzzling piece to figure out like who goes with who. Kind of imagine my surgeon thinking about my surgery, finding what we call my golden lungs nice. To fit my cavity. But I like to think of the pieces as being really joyful and thinking of life as full of possibilities. So they're really bright colors, leaning especially into this collection I just released, this micro collection with Charlotte Russell Gallery this month. They just released yesterday, with lots of neons. So they're meant to be joyful. You know, there is a lot of like hidden meaning in there for me, but they're bright, they're bold, some are really large. And yeah, I think that might give you a small glimpse.
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who may be driving, I'm gonna kind of simplify it, at least my first impressions when I first encountered your work. And this was before you came over to Art Space. It resonated for me a lot because, as some of you may know, I work in abstract shapes, which a lot of them are also inspired by nature, and a lot of them do come from the negative spaces in the trees. So I'm like, yes,
Oh
resonates so
yeah.
much. And you also have bright colors and whatnot. But an easy way, or the first time I saw them, what I was thinking was like, that is so cool. How is she taking these larger pieces of wood and they seem, again, they have like organic shapes. They're not like clean cut edges. They're not jagged edges either, but like they just seem to kind of be sewn together, which is almost like that contrast between, you have this hard, supposedly heavy material, or at least that's the impression, but then they're
Mhm.
being sewn together with this tiny little thread, which you may consider more like for something lightweight, like cloth. And then they're colorful and abstract. I don't know. I think of them as sculptural objects, honestly, that kind of
Yeah.
seem to come out of the wall and just kind of interact with the space a little bit differently. But they're not also the kind of thing where it's just sitting on a pedestal and that's it. And it seems like you can't touch it. I'm not saying the wall ones necessarily you want to touch them, because also they feel kind of delicate at the same time. But it's like you definitely want to come in for a closer look. So that's my rambly description of what my
Yeah.
impression was
Well,
on them. But
I
uh
think that is important to note because I didn't mention, but there are only two tiny threads. There are only four spots where I've drilled, which also has a deeper meaning for me. But there's only four spots I've drilled where there's two tiny threads. So when you look, it really does appeal quite fragile. But you
yeah,
know, when I store the work, when I pack the work, I fold the work in half. I mean, they're very sturdy
so
and they're meant to
practical.
feel like, I don't know, they're meant to feel that like worn nature. Like they've been touched by so many hands by the time they're finished. You know what I mean? They've been cut, they've been, sanded, they've been painted, they've been sometimes scraped, they've been, this whole journey. So come up
Yeah.
and touch it is all I'm saying. I think you
No.
can't hurt them.
Yeah, that's absolutely lovely. And then when you moved into Art Space, then it was extra special because not just had I seen them out in the wild, so to speak, on exhibitions, but now I could actually see you working on them and, of course, interact with you. And, Jack and I got to know you better and like go into the space and like dork out on like materials and procedures and all the things. So it definitely changes things for us. And then, at least for myself personally, like I did not know or I hadn't really put two and two together, the whole relationship with the lungs and the shapes, and then like learning your actual story. I mean, it just, yeah. Anyways, I don't want to dive into that too far because that's another
Yeah.
rabbit hole. We'll cover some of that, but just to learn that part, I don't know, it's magic. I'm just gonna go with that. Mhm.
Yeah, and I think that's one of my favorite things about your work is that it is so immediately recognizable. And even when you were talking about the materials that you use and they've been touched by so many hands, I love that symbolism and what that represents too, because it has that underlining theme of being resilient and the strength that comes from such delicate moments or such delicate processes. So I'm wondering if you could share with us more of your journey of discovering your creative voice and that very recognizable visual style. You've mentioned a little bit about how it mirrors your own personal journey. But when did this part of your creative style really come about?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I could take this conversation in a lot of different directions because, to ask me like, where do you find your voice or your visual style? I think that I would say that it's been a lifelong journey. And if I look back and, I think we all as artists kind of look back at our work and, see common threads that kind of start to pop up or try to look to see where our distinct voices are in that process of trying to find it, and what I've found with my voice is that it is always mirroring my personal experiences. So I started really early, which I'll talk about later, I guess, but in the arts. And so It's hard to say like when I discovered my voice, because there's been times where I worked in watercolors when my children were in the womb, you know what I mean? And then there was times after when motherhood became really hard and I had to work with like stark materials that felt like void of color and felt really isolating. And so like I feel like I am always I had this college professor, his name was Greg Staples, or excuse me, Greg Carter. And he always asked me like what comes first, like material or idea. And for me, it's always idea, because I feel like for me, art is like art therapy. And so the work is not necessarily even for other people. In fact, when I finished with the work, I could never see that work again and I would be fine, which is weird because I think some people get really attached to work and it's like hard to let it go. But for me, it's like my work here is done. Like what I need from the work is process. So this is me sort of rambling and saying that like I've always had my work has followed my idea. So when I was disabled before my surgery, which is what this work is about, my work was paint like dragged through obstacles, right? It was on canvas still, and then it became on paper because that was really what I could have access to. It was the resources like available to me in that moment that I could, easily accessible to me. And then after surgery, I needed something physical. I needed something heavy. I needed something that I could have this new sense of freedom that could like translate into the work. And so that's when it happened. Like before that, I never worked with wood, so like, I can almost tell you like the day I picked it up, right? And the day that it changed, because it was probably 6 months after my surgery, and then it was just like, I can't get enough of it. I can't stop working in this. Like, I need to know everything. And I'm not, I'm not a woodworker. So like, I just started taking woodworking classes at NC Craft Center. I just had my second class on Monday, and I just got a grant from the amazing United Arts Council to get I know, right? Like, so supportive of our community. They're amazing. And so I got all of these new woodworking tools. And so I don't know if it's just as much of a voice as like following what I need to say with the work. If that's kind of a long-winded way of saying that's how I found my own thing. So you mentioned earlier that there's going to be this thing at Greensboro Project Space. I feel like that's like an accumulation of all these ideas I've been trying to figure out with my work, which is the idea of like object as vessel, process as catharsis. So it's going to be this 2-week experience about that. And I'm bringing in some artists who I feel like kind of embody that experience. But if there's a thread through like my work through the years, it's that.
Well, I have a question for you. Oh, no, you're good. You're good. I have a question for you based on what you just discussed. So it's kind of a two-parter. So the first one is, if you're comfortable with it, would you share with our listeners what that procedure was? I know we've kind of said a thing here or there. And then the second part is, with that in mind, yes, art as therapy, for a lot of us, throughout our lives, we may use it, but that doesn't mean we show our work. So when did it turn into, I need to put this out there? It's not just for me personally to heal, but I actually want to share it with others. So sorry, a two-parter, but I want to tie those two together if possible.
So one, I had a double lung transplant in 2019, in June of 2019. So I'm like almost a 4-year-old baby right now. I'm like a brand new baby in the world.
That's awesome.
So that's a big deal. And then why show the work? Everybody makes work for different reasons. I don't feel like work should be made to like hide in a drawer, personally. But I do feel like with this work in particular, something that I really needed before surgery was to see myself represented. So representation, as we know, is like really important for everyone, right? To be able to like see something successful and then, be able to model that in yourself or whatever. So for me, a lot of why I make the work I make now is trying to like being able to discuss, being able to like talk about these things. And like it translates, like when we have fifth graders come through art space, we have those wonderful art tours, which I love because I used to be an art teacher.
They ask
With
tough
them, I'm like,
questions.
yeah, the best questions. Excuse me.
So good.
But I talk with them. It's not about balancing health with them. It's like about balancing homework or about balancing their soccer. Like it's a universal message, right? That people can relate to, right? But I would say two, I want to make a living by it now because I can't be an art teacher anymore because of all the germs and because I'm one of those beautiful immunocompromised people. So that's a reason to put it out in the world. But also, I think it's important to be able to have those discussions or people to be able to identify themselves in you, or likewise. Like I think that's why I am drawn to work. Right? It's like when I see a connection of an experience or a memory or a feeling or yeah.
Yeah, it's like that idea of make your work so personal, it's and vulnerable, it's universal.
Yeah.
And then that's when people click with it and go, maybe my condition is different than yours, but I felt like it affected my life in XYZ way, similar to yours, just in a slightly different way. Like maybe it was a different organ or a different, maybe it was like something, more in the mind instead of the body. Like it could be so many different things.
It
But I
could be.
love
I
the
mean,
idea.
it
Yeah.
is a story of chronic illness, but also, like I said before, like these are totems. They're meant to be totems of strength. They're meant to be totems of possibility, of totems of joy, like, so.
I love that. And I think one quote that I heard, I guess probably a year or two ago at this point, that really stuck, that I feel like when you were talking about representation really applies. It's make the work that either your past or future self needs to have in order to feel seen. And I think that's such the amazing thing of being an artist, is that you can help people and make others feel seen. And you may have no idea in your lifetime. It may be someone 10 years from now, 30 years from now. And if someone can just find comfort and strength and resilience and hope through being present with the work that you make, you can almost, as you were saying, use your objects as a vessel to transfer hope and possibility to other people, which is, I feel like, the magic of the creative process, which is so amazing. And I'm sure it's something that you think about when making your work, especially when you think about where you potentially may want to display your work. So how do you feel like the work that you create influences the type of professional opportunities that you pursue? Kind of shifting a little bit more from the creative process into the business side of it, the logistics of getting your work out there. How does the work you make influence what opportunities you pursue?
Yeah, I think that's a great transition because I mean, you think of like your voice, right? But your voice also has to do with your values, right? And then that translates into your goals, and that translates into your actions. You know what I mean? So it's like this whole thing, but it absolutely affects where I want to put my work. I mean, a really big thing about one of the proponents of like my work or process is community is really important to me. Like obviously there's this scaffold exhibition coming up in May with the intent to like elevate other voices, but it's not about me. It's about bringing other people into community conversation. Right. So like, that's a really big piece of it. So a lot of the things that, I approach or am interested in I do like group shows. I like having that conversation of work next to each other, and not just the work, but the people and the relationships that you build with that. So community is really important. So that leads a lot of what I do. But then another thing, but like I talked about before, is representation. So I seek out healing spaces for my work to be in. Like right now it's at Atrium Wake Forest Hospital in Winston-Salem. It's going to be at Duke University Hospital in May, in the corridors where like an Alexander Calder used to hang. So we're excited about that.
That is so
But the people that are walking up and down those hallways, like that's the people I want to see my work. That's the people, and if it's not about selling it, it's not about like flying off the walls. It's about like being in that space, because I've spent a lot of time in those spaces. So I am very specific about, where the work goes. And I don't know. Yeah, it leads from this place of like intent, values, like what's important to me. And yeah.
I love that. And I think that is so important when, for any of our listeners who may be exploring a specific theme or who may be tied to a specific mission or representation. It's one of those things. I think if you try to be everywhere, it may be difficult, but if you just lean on the work first, like you were saying, who is the audience that you are trying to connect with, that you want to connect with your work? That is really where the obvious ways in which to partner with people in your community to the exhibition spaces. And it kind of all falls into place when you think of the work for first and the intention of the work.
Yeah, and I absolutely love that angle, because say I was the patient and then I find out the artwork that I'm, oogling and loving is someone that went through a similar experience. I feel like the connection is even stronger. Or that I identify with and maybe in some other way. Maybe they are a brown person like me. Then it's like, oh my gosh, like this is awesome. So I love that you're putting it in the places of where either you used to be, or perhaps, we all may end up there. That's universal.
Yeah.
We may all end up going there at some point. With that being said, have you ever said no to a potentially lucrative opportunity? And if so, what made you decide to say no?
I mean, I think maybe I probably have. There's not like a moment in time where I'm like, oh, I really regret that. There's nothing I can point to that says that. I think that I could more so I could think about opportunities that I've said yes to that I probably should have said no to. Like more the opposite. But then in the moment it felt good. And then later it's like, oh, that doesn't align with who I am, or like, but
Was there something
no,
specific that stuck out about those? Was it a timing thing or
I think
location?
it was
Was it
more
values?
I won't say names or anything, and this is in the past more so than recently. But it felt like it had more to do with the relationships, or it had more to do with a facade of what I thought it was, and then once you get involved in what it actually is, if that makes sense, yeah.
Okay.
So.
Okay, that's
I think that definitely does. I think especially whether you're partnering with specific organizations, whether you're having your work display in spaces, a lot of it, especially with us being artists, being super intentional about what our work is, what it represents, how it's presented. It is very important to kind of do your setting, so to speak, of community, whether community organizations or just, not that one person is right or wrong, but like, is this a good fit? And I think that's one thing of transitioning from an emerging artist to somewhat becoming established, is I feel like when you're emerging, it's like so hungry for any opportunity out there, like any space, yes, anything. But when you have that confidence in your work, got a few displays under your belt, I think that is a part of your creative development of transitioning to somewhat vetting the opportunities of how much do they prioritize representation? What kind of events do they hold? Is it more about making money or engaging more of the community? Again, neither one of them is wrong or right, but trying to make conscious decisions as a business owner and thinking of your work as a business. Because once you put it in someone else's hands, they're representing you. And if someone discovers you through them, their reputation may be in line with your reputation, for better or worse. And so I think recognizing every time you display your work, you're partnering yourself with them, is a very good cautionary tale for people to think about if you're listening as you grow.
Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Well, Jean Gray, one of the questions we like to ask everybody is, and we're curious, of course, to see what you'll say about this one, is how do you define success as an artist?
Yeah, there's commercial success, there's personal success. So it just depends on what you want to talk about. But if you think commercial success, your success is going to be defined, or mine is, by I might have a goal, what I want to reach financially for that year, right? And then I either meet that goal or I don't. You can give yourself grace in that period. But I think I don't define success necessarily by a blue chip gallery or a You know what I mean? I mean, personally, my success is more personal, right? Like that's sort of my more essential driver. For me, it's, can be like boiled all the way back down to studio, which is like, did I solve a problem in the studio today? Yes, I did. And that's, and that's what always brings me back is this idea of like this relationship with the work, the relationship with the process, and the constant problem solving that is involved in that work. And, I'm not always successful in the studio. Sometimes you walk away a little frustrated, but I think, to boil it all the way back there, like a success is a good day in the studio. A success is a good relationship formed or a good conversation when someone comes through the studio or the gallery or the exhibition. Mine is more personal successes that I feel than more focused on commercial. I mean, obviously, if that is your goal, that's where your energy is going to be, but that's not my current goal.
And that makes sense because I feel like a lot of artists agree with us. At least when you step into the studio to make the work, you have to separate the financial out. Otherwise,
Yes.
it could negatively impact your work if you start going, am I making something that will sell? As opposed to, no, worry about that once you step away. And then, there's strategies around it, but try to keep them separated. So I love that.
And now you've shared with us the many phases of your creative journey, touched on all of them. You've worked in various mediums, had different work throughout each phase of your life. But what is one piece of advice you wish you had heard before you got started on your creative journey?
Well, you keep hearing what we talked earlier about voice, but like no one has the experiences that you do. No one's going to draw a line like you will. No one's going to pick the exact color that you're going to pick. No one is I don't know, you're as unique and as interesting as, I don't know, like your voice is you. It's all the things that has affected you. And just use that, like lean hard into your perspective, your insight. You know what I mean? Like, I think that, yeah, I'd say lean inwards instead of out.
I love that. I love that.
Good.
Yeah, I like that. And I think I would add to that, it's like your voice is like the sum of your experiences. Your style is what's outwardly perceivable in the work itself. And that can change over time. And I don't know, I remember when you showed me this was a few months back. Sorry, listeners, we don't have a picture of this, but a few months back, you had showed me some of your earlier watercolor work, which I'm sure some of that is online. It looks so different. From a style perspective, it was also different medium. It was 2D instead of 3D. Like there were things, but there were still messages that carried through and threads through. And it's like, that's still your voice. So it's one of those kind of clarifying points for artists. Like you can have different styles as long as the voice is authentic, they'll tie back together. And I don't know, I love seeing that flexibility. I don't know, it's fantastic. But if somebody were to hand you $100 right now, what would you splurge on or invest in? Has to be something that brings you joy and relates to your art or business.
I recently actually saw Makita shear and it was like $89. So I'd probably get that. Yeah, I'd probably get that. Why not?
Tools.
I love that. More tools, more materials.
Yep.
Classic artist. I love it. And now you have so many upcoming events and exhibitions that you're looking forward to. So for our listeners, what are you looking forward to? What exhibitions, call for art, all the things? Share it so they can be involved and cheerlead you on.
Well, it's funny you brought up the prints. So I have a couple of throwback watercolor bouquets that I'm breaking out for Art and Bloom coming up. So that's really exciting. I have a call for artists, women, non-binary, local North Carolina artists at Art Space. Please apply. It's March 8th is our deadline. It's kind of a fast-paced thing, but you'll hear by March 26th. Then we hang, and it's going to go April to June. But thrilled to sort of elevate some other women's voices because there's obviously such a gap in lots of different spaces. Thrilled to have opened up an online exhibition with Charlotte Russell yesterday. That'll be up during the month of February. I think this might air near Valentine's Day, but the work is leaning into idea of the organ of the heart. It's very playful. There's some sort of wooden candy hearts-ish in the exhibition where I'm playing with some of my new woodworking tools. I'm really excited about that. All kinds of stuff. I mean, I think that's just recent, so I think I'll stop there. But to check in with me, you know, you can follow JG period 4 dots, FOURDOTS, to see updates coming up, or my website, my4dots.com. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We'll definitely have all of those linked in today's episode notes. And thank you so much for being on this podcast. It was so much fun talking to you.
Yes.
Well, it's just a joy and a delight, honestly. And thank y'all for your work, because I mean, you're just digging into the community, reaching out, like sharing different perspectives. I really appreciate it and really enjoy listening in. So thank you.
Hey, this is the way that we give back. That's the way we see it. Community over competition and sharing forward what we've learned, for sure. Before we go, Jean Gray, would you mind staying with us a few extra minutes so we can discuss the scale and pricing tiers for sculptural work for the bonus segment for podcast supporters?
Yeah, happy to.
Yay!
Awesome. Well, for our listeners, if you want to become a supporter of the podcast, head on over to levelupartist.com and find out how you too can support the podcast.
And if you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share what you've learned, you can follow us on social media at Metamate Art across all platforms.
And I'm at JSaver Studio on all platforms. Or if you want to stay connected with the podcast, we are at Level Up Artist on Instagram. Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.